At the cemetery, a former Navy SEAL expected silence. Instead, he found a German shepherd standing guard at a stranger's grave, placing a small wooden carving at its base like a soldier completing a final mission. The dog had no leash, no owner in sight, yet returned day after day, rain or snow, as if protecting a secret no one else knew. That moment shattered Luke Carter's world, pulling him into a truth buried deeper than any grave. Before we begin, let me know where you're watching from. Drop it in the comments. All right, let's begin. Gray winter light filtered through a thin veil of snow drifting across the Denver National Military Cemetery. The sky was pale and colorless, like someone had drained the world of warmth and left only silence behind. Luke Carter moved slowly along the gravel path, his boots pressing into the frost-hardened ground with a familiar heaviness. He was 34, tall, with a solid frame shaped by years as a Navy SEAL. His posture carried a quiet discipline, back straight, shoulders squared, chin lifted, though his blue-gray eyes betrayed exhaustion. His face was angular, a sharp jaw darkened by stubble, the kind that suggested he had stopped caring about appearances the moment civilian life demanded them. His hair, short and dark, was cut in the habitual style of a man who spent more years in uniform than out of it. Luke wasn't intimidating by size, he was intimidating by presence. The kind of man who scanned every exit without meaning to, the kind of man who looked like he had memories stored in the shadows behind his eyes. He walked toward a gravestone marked with the name of his younger brother, David Carter. David had died overseas. Luke had been deployed somewhere else when the call came in. He had missed the funeral. He had missed a lot of things. The guilt had become a dull ache, constant, throbbing, familiar. Visiting the grave was part of his attempt to feel something other than regret. Today, Denver lay under its first thin snow of the season. Luke hated winters now. They reminded him too much of waiting for extraction, waiting for bad news, waiting to see who died next. His breath fogged in the air as he stopped in front of David's headstone. A bouquet of fresh evergreens lay in his hand, simple, understated, nothing like the elaborate tributes others left around him. David always hated unnecessary attention. Luke knelt, resting a gloved hand against the cold surface of the stone, and stayed there without moving. His heartbeat felt too loud, too heavy. The silence pressed against him. He wished he could say something to the stone. He wished the stone could say something back. Seconds, maybe minutes passed. He stood again, brushing melting snow from the knee of his jeans. He wasn't ready to leave, but he didn't know how to stay either. Turning to walk back toward the path, movement flickered in the corner of his vision. Luke stopped. Not 10 yards away, in front of a completely different gravestone, lay a dog. A German shepherd, large, powerful, with fur the color of storm clouds, black and deep brown blending together. The dog's coat was thick yet dull from exposure to winter wind, and snowflakes clung to his back. His ears, one slightly torn at the tip, shifted alertly at every sound. He wasn't a puppy. Luke guessed 7 or 8 years old, judging by the silvering fur around his muzzle, but his eyes, amber gold and intelligent, held a depth Luke recognized instantly. The dog wasn't just lying there to rest. He was standing guard. Luke knew working dogs. During his service, he had trained alongside K-9 units. Dogs who learned obedience with discipline and loyalty with blood. Dogs who ran into gunfire because the humans they trusted needed them to. This dog held that same energy, alert, focused, waiting. Luke stayed silent and watched. The dog lowered his head, nudging something at the base of the gravestone with surprising gentleness. A tiny object, small, white, sat against the dark granite. The dog used his muzzle to adjust its position, almost like placing an offering. He lingered there for a moment, then stepped back. Luke's instincts stirred. Something was off. No collar, no leash, no human nearby in a cemetery mostly empty this early. The dog shouldn't be here, yet he behaved like someone who belonged. Slowly, Luke walked toward the scene. He didn't make noise. SEAL training had carved silence into his bones. At his movement, the dog lifted his head, muscles tightening beneath the thick fur. Luke stopped, not wanting to spook him. The dog studied him with sharp, assessing eyes, not fearful, not aggressive, simply aware. Then, in a sudden fluid motion, he turned away and trotted toward the tree line bordering the cemetery. His paws barely disturbed the snow as he disappeared into the dense growth of icy pines. Luke hesitated only a second before kneeling beside the gravestone. The object the dog had left behind was a carved wooden bird, no larger than a pocket knife. The paint was chipped, the edges frayed. Someone had spent hours shaping every line, tiny feathers etched by hand, wings slightly bowed, like it was caught mid-flight. Snowflakes gathered on it, melting slowly. Luke brushed them away with his thumb. On the underside of the carving, faintly etched into the worn wood, were 3 initials: L.C. Luke. Carter froze, his chest tightened. The initials were his. His breathing slowed, then stilled. His heartbeat hammered once, twice, then loudly in his ears. Impossible. He had never seen this thing, never carved it, never held it, and yet there were his initials. Lightning quick, his eyes flicked from the carving to the gravestone. He expected to see his own name. Instead, the name etched into the stone read, Ethan Miller, someone Luke had never known. The wooden bird felt heavier in his hand, as though it carried the weight of someone else's grief. His mind raced. How did the dog get an object with his initials? Why leave it on this grave, not David's? Was this some kind of message? Was someone trying to reach him? His pulse surged with adrenaline, the familiar, sharp kind that always came before a mission. The wind hissed through the pine trees behind him, cold and smooth, like a whispered warning. Then, a sound, small, sharp, snow crunched, not far away. Luke jerked upright and instinctively moved into a defensive stance. A lifetime of training kicked in, and every muscle tensed. Footsteps, light, calculated. Someone was there, in the shadows of the pines, watching. He snapped his head toward the noise, scanning through drifting snow and skeletal branches. A dark silhouette shifted between the trees and vanished. Luke didn't call out, didn't move, didn't breathe. The dog, the carving, the initials, the stranger, it all collided into a single thought. He was not alone. Morning sunlight slipped through the thin hospital-white clouds above Denver, erasing the traces of snow left from yesterday. Luke Carter walked briskly down the sidewalk, the wooden bird secure inside his jacket. The memory of the carved initials and the silent, watchful dog haunted him through the night. He had returned to the cemetery early, hoping to find the German shepherd, but the animal was gone. Instead, there were faint paw prints in the snow that led toward the street, disappearing where the asphalt had been plowed clean. Luke followed instinct more than logic. Years as a Navy SEAL had made him trust patterns, even when they didn't make sense. He spotted the dog again near an old bus terminal, resting by a bike rack as if waiting for someone who never arrived. Up close, the dog looked rougher than he had noticed before. The uneven patches of fur around his neck suggested a collar had once sat there for a long time, rubbing against the skin. Old scars traced along his left hind leg like pale lightning under the fur. His ribs hinted at hunger, not starvation, but neglect. Luke approached slowly, letting the dog catch his scent. The dog didn't back away. His posture remained steady, ears up, eyes sharp. Luke crouched, extending his hand. The dog allowed him to touch the scruff of his neck. That was enough. The dog followed him willingly. Luke took him to Denver Animal Rescue and Community Clinic. A modest building painted a fading shade of yellow. A plaque by the front door listed the names of sponsors who donated enough money to keep the clinic running. Inside, a receptionist looked up from her computer. Her name tag read, Stacy, early 20s, petite, ponytail, freckles scattered across her cheeks like she had been built to smile in warm places, not cold ones. Stacy's voice was quick, friendly, practiced in comforting nervous pet owners. Luke explained he had found a stray and wanted the microchip scanned. Stacy led him to a small examination room. A wall poster behind her advertised adoption events with cartoon dogs wearing party hats. Moments later, a veterinarian walked in. His name was Dr. Samuel Green, around 50, tall, slightly stooped at the shoulders. His hair was salt and pepper, trimmed short. Thick-framed glasses slipped down to the bridge of his nose. He had the kind of face that carried permanent fatigue, the type earned from working too many late nights and caring too much about animals owners forgot. Luke recognized that kind of exhaustion. He saw it in mirrors. Dr. Green gently placed a hand on the dog's back, speaking softly as he reached for a handheld scanner. His voice held a warm rasp, the residue of years speaking over barking and clinic machines. He scanned the dog across the shoulders, moving slowly, methodically. The scanner beeped. Dr. Green checked the number on his tablet. Luke waited, muscles tense. When the doctor frowned, Luke leaned forward. Dr. Green explained that the microchip was registered under an outdated system. Records linked to a person named Maya Miller, but the file was incomplete. No recent phone number, no updated address. The last entry in the record was from nearly 4 years ago, marked address change pending. Since then, no updates, no contact, no activity. Vanished wasn't a clinical term, but it was the only one that made sense. Then Dr. Green added another detail. The dog once belonged to a man named Ethan Miller, a firefighter who died in an industrial explosion. Ethan's personal information had been tied to the chip as an alternate contact. That part of the file was clear. Ethan Miller, deceased, line of duty fatality. Luke felt his heartbeat slow as the weight of the moment settled. Ethan, the name carved on the grave. The dog pressed his head against Luke's knee, as if sensing the tension. Ethan's connection wasn't an accident. Luke asked about the explosion. Dr. Green paused, as if weighing whether to speak. He finally explained that Ethan had been reported as a hero, but rumors circulated within the rescue network. Rumors that Ethan had been investigating something happening inside the warehouse before it went up in flames. Rumors that whatever Ethan saw wasn't supposed to be seen. Luke listened in stillness. He recognized the tone in Dr. Green's voice. Someone who knew more than was wise to say. Someone who feared the story. The dog shifted his weight, nudging Luke's hand. Luke stroked the fur between the dog's ears. His mind worked through possibilities. He didn't know the woman or the man. He didn't know how a dog had come into possession of a carved bird with his initials. Yet, he knew one thing with deep, unshakable clarity: the dog wanted him to follow. Luke asked for Maya's last registered address. Dr. Green hesitated. It wasn't standard protocol to hand out personal information. Luke didn't argue. Instead, he quietly rested the wooden bird on the metal exam table. When Dr. Green saw the initials, his eyes softened. Not alarm, but recognition. Maybe he had seen things like this before. Animals carrying stories when the humans couldn't. He scribbled the address onto a sticky note and slid it across the table. The clinic was quiet as Luke thanked them and left. Outside, wind knifed across his face. The city noise buzzed distant and blurred, like a world he had stepped out of long ago. He walked with purpose toward the truck he had parked by the curb. The dog leaped into the passenger seat without hesitation. Not astray, not scared, just certain. The address led to a small apartment complex on 15th Street, peeling paint, sagging balcony rails, a place where people lived when they had nowhere else to go. Luke stood outside one of the doors. Apartment 203. A faded welcome mat lay crooked at the threshold. He knocked, no answer. He knocked again, still nothing. He turned to leave, but something shifted in the corner of his vision. The dog padded toward a side staircase at the end of the hallway. His movement was purposeful. Luke followed. The staircase led down to the mailroom of the building, a cluttered space smelling faintly of cardboard and metal dust. Old mailboxes lined the wall. One of them was half open. Maya M. Inside, Luke noticed envelopes marked "Return to Sender." Whatever life Maya had at this address had dissolved, but tucked in a corner was something else. A folded piece of paper, yellowed and worn. A forwarding address form, not fully filled out. Most of it blank. But one thing was written clearly. Destination, West Briar District, Building C. No apartment number, so details. Luke's pulse tightened. He wasn't sure if this was coincidence or fate, but the dog was standing by the exit door, staring back at him with unwavering eyes. The dog wasn't asking, he was leading. Luke tucked the paper into his jacket. He locked eyes with the dog, and for the first time, he felt something unfamiliar creep into the cold places of his chest. Hope. Then the fluorescent light above them flickered. In the distorted reflection of a mailroom window, Luke caught a glimpse of someone stepping around the corner at the end of the corridor. A slow shadow, watching. Before Luke could react, the figure turned and disappeared up the stairwell. Evening settled over Denver, with a dim orange glow leaking through low clouds, the kind of light that made the city appear suspended between day and night. Luke parked his truck outside the Municipal Records and Public Safety Archive, a squat concrete building whose windows were more metal than glass, as if it had been built to keep secrets rather than store them. The dog sat in the passenger seat, eyes alert, watching every movement as if evaluating each second for danger. Luke had begun calling him Shadow in his mind. Shadow moved with a quiet precision, never wasting energy or sound, the same way soldiers who had seen too much learned to exist in spaces instead of standing out in them. Luke stepped into the building, Shadow pacing beside him. The security desk in the lobby was manned by an older guard named Frank Morales, a man in his 60s with thinning gray hair and a belly softened by years of sitting. His uniform was crisp, but his posture said his back hurt most of the time. Frank's face held deep laugh lines paired with sad eyes. Someone who once laughed easily, but life had slowly taught him to lower his expectations. He asked for Luke's ID, barely looking at it, then nodded toward the elevator. Frank seemed like the type of man who used to care about rules, until the world stopped caring about him. The elevator doors opened with a groan. On the third floor, the air changed. It smelled like dust and old paper, the scent of forgotten stories. Luke approached a service counter where a woman sat hunched over a mountain of folders. Her name badge read, Sarah Kinney. Sarah was in her late 30s, tall and slender, with long auburn hair pulled into a loose bun. A few strands escaped, framing her face, softening her sharp cheekbones. Her skin was fair, lightly freckled, and her dark brown eyes carried a quiet intelligence edged with exhaustion. She wore a knitted sweater layered under a worn blazer, practical clothing chosen by someone who didn't spend money unless she had to. Sarah spoke with the tone of someone who had learned to keep people at a distance without being rude. Growing up, the eldest of 4 siblings had taught her both responsibility and caution. Her tone was efficient, not unkind. Luke explained he was looking for records related to firefighter Ethan Miller. Something flickered in Sarah's eyes, a recognition not of the name, but of the emotional weight Luke carried. Instead of pointing him toward a form to fill, Sarah stood and led him deeper into the archive. Her long strides were deliberate, a pace that said she rarely rushed, but always knew exactly where she was going. She stopped in front of a high-density storage shelf and keyed in a code. The mechanical shelves separated, revealing rows of beige boxes. She searched rapidly, slender fingers scanning labels until she found what she needed. Incident file, warehouse explosion, case 3118, closed. She set the box on a metal table and flipped it. Open. Shadow lay at Luke's feet, chin resting between his paws, but his gaze tracked every hand movement. Inside the box were printed reports, photographs, and a thick incident analysis. A smaller folder inside held personal belongings, Ethan's name written on the tab in neat block lettering. The first document was a fire report, but Luke's eyes locked onto a different item, a notebook, the cover stained and warped by water. Ethan's handwriting filled the pages with neat, compact lettering. Luke read silently. Ethan described suspicions about the warehouse he had been called to multiple times. He believed illegal shipments were moving through the building at night. He wasn't just a firefighter, he cared about people. He had planned to document everything and submit it to internal affairs. People don't burn buildings to hide something small, Ethan wrote. They burn them to hide something big. Luke recognized the type of man Ethan was. Duty wasn't a job, it was oxygen. Luke flipped the page and found the section labeled Shadow. Ethan had trained Shadow as his companion and working dog, not for police work, but for emotional grounding. Ethan believed dogs could be anchors for trauma survivors. The entry described Ethan's plan to open a sanctuary for retired canines and search and rescue dogs, animals who had given everything and deserved peace. Then Luke found a folded paper tucked between pages. On it were 3 words: to the most trusted. Beneath it, in faded pencil, a sketch of a small bird with wings outstretched. Luke felt the blood drain from his face. The carving, the initials. Shadow lifted his head at the change in Luke's breathing. Luke turned one more page, finding the final entry. It was short. If anything happens to me, Shadow knows. He will find the one meant to finish this. A chill ran down Luke's spine. He didn't know Ethan. Ethan didn't know him. Yet the dog had led Luke to this. Shadow nudged Luke's leg as if urging him onward. Sarah watched Luke as he processed the information. Her expression softened, a compassion that slipped past her professional mask. She cleared her throat gently and pointed toward a sealed evidence bag tucked into the bottom of the box. Inside was a USB drive. Luke recognized the model, industrial grade, used by first responders for secure transfers. Sarah hesitated, torn between rules and conscience. She slid the drive toward him. If this leaves the archive, she said quietly, I never saw it. Luke nodded once. He didn't have to say thank you. His eyes said enough. He tucked the drive into his jacket next to the wooden bird. He closed the notebook and returned everything as Sarah had arranged it. A symbol of respect. For Ethan, for truth, for stories that should never have been buried. Shadow rose silently, ready. Luke turned to walk away, but the elevator dinged before he reached it. The doors opened, revealing a tall man in a dark coat, stepping out. His stature was athletic, posture rigid. His hair was closely cropped, jaw square, clean-shaven. His eyes, sharp steel gray, locked onto Luke and Shadow without blinking. Luke recognized that look immediately. Surveillance, not curiosity. Assessment. The man's voice cut through the air, low and controlled. "What are you doing here?" He wasn't security. He wasn't a civilian. He was someone used to being obeyed. Luke didn't answer. He stepped forward, shoulders squared. Shadow stood at his side, muscles taut, ready. The man shifted his weight subtly, blocking the exit. He wasn't random. He was waiting, watching. Night draped itself over the Westbriar district like a heavy, damp blanket. The streetlights flickered in weak intervals, barely cutting through the fog rolling between the narrow alleys, turning everything into a blur of shadows and silhouettes. Luke Carter parked across from Building C, the place written on the mail forwarding slip. Shadow sat upright in the passenger seat, ears alert, gaze focused on the building entrance as if he already knew who they were here to find. Luke studied the building. It looked tired, brick-stained by years of rain and exhaust, windows clouded by neglect. The entrance door sagged on its hinges. A buzzing intercom panel held a dozen faded apartment numbers, some scratched out entirely. A dumpster near the alley overflowed with soaked cardboard and broken furniture. This wasn't a place people lived by choice. It was a place they retreated to when life had cornered them. Shadow jumped out of the truck lightly when Luke opened the door. His paws touched the pavement without a sound. Luke followed the dog across the street, staying near the edges of shadows. He had learned to move quietly long before he had learned to read or write. The building's lobby was dim. A single fluorescent bulb buzzed from above, its light stuttering like a heartbeat on the verge of failing. Luke scanned the mailboxes. Apartment numbers ranged from C1 to C10. Only one mailbox had any trace of recent activity, apartment C7, a faded sticker with the name M. Miller. Luke's heartbeat slowed, not from fear, but from focus. He moved through the hallway, Shadow walking ahead, pausing every few steps to sniff the air. The hallway felt claustrophobic, walls lined with peeling wallpaper, patterned in faded mustard yellow floral shapes. Luke knocked once at C7, no answer. He knocked again, harder, still silence. He exhaled slowly, allowing intuition to guide him rather than logic. When he placed his palm against the door, Shadow quietly stepped forward and touched his nose to the bottom seam. A soft whine escaped the dog's throat, quiet, urgent, not fearful. Someone was inside. Luke didn't kick the door. He had broken into places in war, but this wasn't a war. He stepped back and tried a different approach. He spoke softly through the door. No response, no movement, nothing, until a faint shift sounded inside, like someone leaning back against the wall, holding their breath. Luke took a subtle step away from the door and moved to the side, far enough that if someone aimed a gun through the peephole, they wouldn't hit him. Shadow stayed close, tail low, eyes focused on the gap under the door. The small metal flap on the peephole shifted. Someone was looking back. Luke kept his voice calm, his posture neutral. He didn't move or raise his hands. Seconds passed. Then, a soft click, the chain lock sliding. The door opened only 2 inches. A pale face appeared in the crack, a woman, weary and wary. She looked to be in her late 20s. Her hair was long and dark brown, pulled into a messy braid that had more tangles than intention. Loose strands framed her narrow face, highlighting skin that had the pale undertone of someone who rarely saw sunlight. The shadows under her eyes suggested nights spent awake, listening, afraid. She wore a gray hoodie several sizes too big and faded jeans. Her shoulders were tense, her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of the door. Her voice came out low, controlled, edged with fear. Luke saw not just worry, but exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who had been running far too long. She closed the gap in the door, leaving only a sliver of her face visible. Shadow lifted his head suddenly, and when the woman's eyes dropped to the dog, something inside her cracked. Recognition. Pain. She opened the door wider. Luke got his first full view of her. Maya Miller. Not the name in a file, not the ghost of an address. A person, fragile, haunted, but with an underlying fierceness. Maya stepped back, gesturing silently for Luke and Shadow to enter. Her apartment was dim, lit only by 2 lamps on mismatched end tables. A blanket lay on the couch, along with a stack of envelopes. The room looked lived in, yet temporary, like someone prepared to disappear at any moment. Maya watched Luke closely, as someone who learned the hard way that trust was not free. "If you came here to take him," she said, her voice cracking at the edges, "you're wasting your time." Shadow walked directly to her and nudged her hand with his muzzle, the movement gentle and familiar. Maya dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around the dog, burying her face into his fur. Her shoulders shook, not with sobs, but with the silent tremor of someone letting go for the first time in a long time. Luke didn't interrupt. He waited until she stood again, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her hoodie. On the table sat a photo frame face down. Maya hesitated, then turned it over. Ethan Miller stared back at Luke from behind the glass. In the photo, Ethan was tall, broad-shouldered, his jaw defined, his eyes kind. He wore a firefighter uniform with the ease of someone who didn't take pride in the badge, but in the purpose. He radiated sincerity, the rare kind that made people follow him into danger. Maya's voice was steady when she finally spoke. Ethan was her older brother. After their parents died, he had become everything to her: protector, advocate, anchor. When Ethan discovered the warehouse was being used for illegal shipments, he planned to report it, but someone found out. And Ethan died in the explosion. Shadow survived. Ethan's last call to Maya had been rushed, cryptic, filled with fear he tried to hide. He told her that if anything happened, Shadow would lead someone to the evidence. "Not me," Maya whispered. "Someone he trusted." She looked directly at Luke. "He meant you." Luke felt the weight of that settle onto his shoulders, not unwanted, but undeserved. Before he could respond, a noise echoed in the hallway outside. A slow, steady cadence. Footsteps. Heavy, purposeful, not a neighbor wandering to get the mail, not random. They stopped outside the door. Luke nodded once to Maya. She understood and killed the lights. The apartment plunged into darkness. Shadow moved silently to the door, his body low, muscles coiled. The footsteps stayed. A shadow slid across the bottom of the doorframe, then a quiet scrape against the lock. Someone was picking it. Luke moved toward the door, positioning himself to the side, ready. Maya clutched Shadow's fur, eyes wide. The deadbolt shifted. Someone had found them. The lock turned with a soft metallic click. Too controlled, too confident to be a mistake. In the darkness, Luke's pulse slowed rather than rose. Years of combat had rewired his nervous system. Stress didn't make him panic. It sharpened him. The hallway beyond the thin apartment door hummed with that same cold tension, a presence pressing inward like a tide. Shadow stood perfectly still, body low, ears forward, hackles raised, a silent guardian awaiting the signal. Maya gripped a small flashlight in her trembling hand, not as a light source, but as if she believed holding something, anything, might keep her from disappearing into the fear that had chased her for months. The deadbolt turned again. Someone outside knew exactly what they were doing. Luke angled his body parallel to the door. One hand hovered near the frame, the other resting lightly along his thigh, prepared to strike. When the intruder finally breached the lock and cracked the door open, Luke moved, fast, precise. He yanked the door wide, grabbed the figure's wrist, and twisted it sharply. The intruder stumbled inside, losing balance. Shadow lunged just enough to intimidate, a deep warning rumble vibrating through the apartment. Luke flipped the man onto the floor, pinning him. The lamp flicked on. Maya had moved, hand shaking but determined, and illuminated the intruder sprawled across the carpet. It was the man from the archive, the silent watcher, the shadow in the hallway. He lay face down, breath heavy from the impact. Luke pulled him up by the collar and pushed him into a chair. As the man sat upright, Luke finally saw him clearly. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with a sharp angular jaw, dark close-cropped hair, and a scar slicing through his left eyebrow. His skin was pale, but stretched from the neck down were faint marks, like faded burns, that disappeared under the collar of his black jacket. His eyes were steel gray, cold and calculating, the gaze of someone who had once believed in something and lost it. The man spoke for the first time. His voice was rough, deep, gravel dragged across concrete. "You should have stayed away." Luke held the stare, calm, silent. The man's jacket shifted enough for Luke to catch the glint of a badge clipped to the inside pocket. Not police, but private security, a corporate emblem engraved on the metal. That emblem matched the one on the warehouse reports Ethan filed. Not coincidence. The intruder had a name, Calder Shaw. Maya recognized it, her face drained of color. "He was security chief at the warehouse," she whispered. "Ethan said he was dangerous." Calder let out a humorless breath. Ethan wasn't supposed to be there that night. The explosion, the man stopped mid-sentence, jaw tightening. Shadow growled low, sensing the tension. Luke leaned in, voice low, controlled. Finish it. Calder's fingers tightened around the chair, his jaw clenched. No one was meant to die. For the first time, emotion cracked his voice. Guilt, regret. He wasn't the mastermind. He was a disposable tool. Maya took a step closer, her eyes steady, even though her hands shook. Why follow us? Why come here? Calder hesitated. When he spoke again, it was barely above a whisper. You weren't supposed to find the files. If you hand over whatever you took from the archive, I leave. All of us forget tonight happened. Luke didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the table, picked up the wooden bird and the USB Ethan hid in the file. Luke placed both on the table between them. This is what he died protecting, Luke said. Calder stared at the bird, at the tiny carved wings. Pain flickered in his expression, a crack in the armor. Ethan was a good man, Calder murmured, voice hollow. Too good. He thought he could change something. He didn't understand. Once you're involved, you don't get out. Luke's voice hardened. You have a choice now. It was a lifeline and a challenge. Calder closed his eyes. When he opened them again, something had shifted. Resolve, maybe redemption. There's a warehouse, he whispered. District 12. Everything is still there. Ledgers, recordings, names. He looked directly into Luke's eyes. If you expose them, they won't be able to hide behind me anymore. That sentence cost him something. Luke nodded once. Then you're taking us there. The warehouse stood alone on an abandoned service road near the edge of the city. Rusted metal siding groaned with the wind. Long-dead floodlights hung by broken wires like forgotten sentinels. Graffiti stretched across the wall like bruises. Calder led them through a side entrance he unlocked with trembling hands. The interior was skeletal, rows of empty shelving and cracked concrete floors. Luke scanned the space, instincts calculating exits, blind corners, vantage points. Maya stayed close to Shadow, who moved ahead, nose low, body alert. Somewhere deep inside, behind stacks of old pallets, sat a steel locker welded shut. Calder pried it open with a crowbar, metal screaming as it bent. Inside lay boxes of documents, hard drives, and a small fireproof case. Luke took the case and opened it. Inside were Ethan's notes, the completed sanctuary blueprint, and a sealed envelope addressed in his handwriting. To whoever Shadow leads. Maya's fingers trembled as she touched the envelope. Luke stepped back, giving her space. She opened it slowly. Inside was a simple letter. Ethan's final words. Shadow will choose the right person. Wherever he stops, trust it. It means you're safe. And please, finish what I couldn't. Maya pressed the paper against her chest, eyes closing as silent tears fell. Calder stepped back, head lowered, the weight of his past heavy on his shoulders. He wasn't forgiven, not yet, but something inside him loosened. The files were transferred. Evidence was turned in. The investigation that Ethan died for finally began. Days later, fog hung low over the military cemetery in Denver. Luke walked between the rows of white markers until he reached Kyle's headstone. Shadow walked beside him, not on a leash, just present, choosing to be there. Luke placed the folded flag on the grave, not as closure, there was no such thing, but as a promise. Shadow sat, pressing his body against Luke's leg, the warmth grounding him in the frozen morning. Not a soldier under command, not a tool following orders, a companion. Luke rested his hand on the dog's head, a beginning, formed not from obligation, but from choice. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or lightning. They come quietly, through an unexpected companion who refuses to leave our side. Shadow was never sent to Luke by chance. He was a reminder that when we feel lost, God finds a way to guide us back to purpose. In life, we all stand at our own graves, graves of regrets, loss, broken dreams. But just like Luke, sometimes God sends us something unexpected to help us rise again. A friend, a moment of courage, a sign we weren't looking for. If you're watching this, may you remember, no matter how dark your path feels, you are not walking alone. God sees your struggle. God hears your quiet prayers, and He will send light, sometimes in the most surprising forms. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs hope. Comment your thoughts below and subscribe to the channel so more stories of faith, courage, and unexpected grace can reach others. May God bless you, protect you, and guide you to the place where you are meant to be. Amen.